But you've taken a few steps to get to where you are now. Like, so I know that you're part Australian. I know you've been in the States. I know you've been in other places as well. Can you tell me a little bit about like how you got to where you are? Because I know little bits and pieces after talking to you for a while, but I don't know the full like story about your background.
Yeah, I feel like with every country that I ended up moving to, I never like actually planned to move there.
Right.
It's always some very spontaneous thing that happened. Oh, maybe I should just go move to Japan, and then I suddenly got really passionate about it, and then I actually ended
Yeah.
up. So that's how it happened. But for Australia, for high school, it was because my friends in Hong Kong, they all went overseas to study abroad. So I was very
Yeah.
lonely, and I was like, okay, maybe I should go somewhere else too. And I'm Australian. I have the passport. So, and we also had some family friends in Sydney. So it just made sense for me to go there for the boarding school. And then in my last year of high school, a consultant came to my school and was like, hey, I help Australian students get into US colleges. So I was like, wow, America is so cool. I've never been to America. I would love to try it. And then, I got passionate about it. My parents were supportive about it. So then I went to LA. And then from LA, I think I heard about the JET program, which is Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, from a friend of mine or something in UCLA. And I got so excited. I was like, wait, you can move to Japan and get paid? Like, that sounds like a dream. So then I applied and then went to interview and then got the job. So I moved there. But then from Japan back to America, that was a really tough move because I was 25 then, and I knew that I really had to make, a career move because I was watching all my friends progress in the career path when I was still like YOLOing, right, in Japan. So that was very tough for me, especially because I would need a work visa to work in America. So that was tough. But then, we made it back because I just knew that Japan is not for me for long term.
Why is that?
There are just a lot of cultural expectations, especially for an Asian female foreigner. Yeah, just a lot of expectations. In America or Australia, like in the Western world, girls are, they like when you say girl power, it means like you want to be independent, right? And maybe good in your career, like that, like independent type of woman. But then girl power in Japan is when you're expected to do all the housework. Like you want to be the perfect housewife, which I definitely know I cannot be. Or like not my dream.
You. Not your dream.
The lifestyle is not for me. So I just knew that Japan is not for me. So I just wanted to go back to a Western country.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So you're like born in Hong Kong, moved to Australia, moved to America, to Japan, and then back to America. So you got a lot of global experience there that not a lot of people have.
Yeah, and then I ended up liking California the best. So even when I was in New York, I was like, okay, Cara, you can stay here for a few years, but after that, you should move back to LA because that's where LA. Yeah, exactly. And it's just where I'm truly happy and myself, I think, out of all the places that I've lived in.
That's awesome. Well, now you're back feeling like yourself again. But so how did you get into content design?
That, again, is something that I never planned to, because back when I was still in college, I don't even think user experience, like the field, was even a thing. So I kind of stumbled upon this career in Japan when I was teaching English, right? I had a lot of free time. So I started writing travel blogs. And then those travel blogs actually got me the job in New York as a marketing copywriter for a crypto startup. So I was doing, marketing copywriting. I was writing emails and social media campaigns and all that. And then I learned that there is someone called a UX writer at my company. So I was like, I got so curious. I was like, wait, you're also a writer, but you're a UX writer. What does UX even stand for? So then I learned about user experience writing. I took the UXCC course, and then I read a lot of books on my own and really learned about content strategy. And I thought that was so interesting because instead of writing marketing copy, you're actually writing the product itself. And it's the thing that users will interact with like day in and day out. And so what you write in the app is actually so impactful. And obviously you can do research to see if what you want to say is actually getting across to the user. So slowly I just got so interested that I decided to just hone into UX writing and go with that instead of marketing copywriting. So from there, I went to Capco, which is a consulting company, and worked for Silicon Valley Bank. and then to Instagram, and then to NBC Universal, and then Venmo, and then eventually at Empower now, and doing the same thing, content design and UX writing.
It's a great journey, and I've heard bits and pieces about your career progression because you've worked as a grader for UXCC. I would just want to go back quickly. Working
Yeah.
for that crypto startup, I know that
Uh-huh.
wasn't UX writing, but like, what was that like? Because I've had dealings with like crypto companies before, and like I did a lot of freelance writing in the 2010s
Yeah.
when I was trying to buy a house, and I ended up writing a lot of white papers for
Oh,
like
yeah, yeah.
cryptocurrencies that were going to launch, none of which exist now. They're all gone.
Really?
But I
What?
was like, they just failed. They were all just like cryptocurrency. I wrote one white paper for a crypto. It was like a weed coin. They were like trying to use crypto to like, I can't even remember. It was like improving the distribution of marijuana, like global marijuana.
Really?
Yeah, it was super weird. And they always offered like, "Do you want to be paid in the coin?" And I'd be like, "Nah, man, I want to get paid in cash. Thank you
Yeah.
very much." Yeah, which ended up being a good deal. But like, I'm interested. Like, what was that like? Was it like a? Did you enjoy it? To me, it just seems like that whole area is just full of like scammers. But I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So we had to deal with that a lot because a lot of people on the platform are indeed scammers, but a lot of people are not. So how do we
Mm,
make new users feel safe and
yeah.
secure that their money is in good hands and that we're not just taking their monies and disappear? So I think that's really when I start to learn how to write about money, and because
Mm,
people freak out and get very anxious when it's about their money. So we want to be upfront, right, about any fees that we're charging or teach people how to identify scammers because there are certain behaviors that they do that show themselves as scammers, and we have a lot of data that shows that. So I would
yeah.
be composing like content like that. When I first started though, because I had no cryptocurrency or like financial background, I had to do a lot of work on my own
Yeah.
just to get more familiar with the area, right, of interest. So I talked to the PM a lot. I would just be, not shy and ask questions because if I don't understand a product, then there is no way I can write something that makes
Yep.
sense to the
Yep.
user, right? And that carries on to today as well for Empower, which is a financial retirement planning app. Like there's still a lot of financial, jargon within the app. So
Mm.
how can I break down all the complex concepts to users? So, but I
You've really carved out a great niche for yourself, working in
yeah, for sure.
financial labs, which is like, for a lot of people, like, for a lot of anyone in tech, really, people tend to bounce around a lot, into different areas. And I know you've had a couple of different experiences, but, at Instagram and then NBC, but it's interesting that you've sort of tended to navigate towards that financial area. It speaks to, I think, the strength of having an area where that
Oh
can be
yeah,
like your key focus, and it's really
definitely.
paid off for you.
Definitely. And I think there's a lot of value in that too, because people don't understand a lot of the financial concepts, or it
Mm.
may just not be accessible, right, to a lot of people. So I do find a lot of value and impact just translating what's complicated jargon into something that everyday people can understand. Whereas in other
Mm.
fields, like when I worked up for Instagram, everything is pretty easy to understand, right? And there is not that much content. So there's very little space for me actually to explain like a complicated concept. The most
Mm.
complicated thing would be like a new feature, but then even
Mm.
then you're not using like a jargon, right? So I would say compared to financial apps, like I definitely find a lot more value in the financial apps because I feel like I'm actually educating users on something that's helpful and that's useful in their everyday life.
What was it like working at Instagram? Because I don't know how much. I know obviously it's all Meta. I don't know what the integration is like between like
Mhm.
Instagram teams and Facebook teams and Oculus teams and whatever. It
Mhm.
seems, at least from the outside, that Instagram is sort of like its own thing sitting over there. And I know there's
Mhm.
integration between the apps and everything, but I'm interested to know what that was like, because
Yeah.
especially because you were very, I'd say fair to say so early in your career. And,
Mhm.
working at a big company like Meta at that point can be quite intimidating. Um, what was that
Yeah.
like for you?
Yeah, honestly, when I got the job offer, I really felt like, wow, like mom, I made it type of moment because
Mm,
especially how old I think I was like 27, 28 when I got the job. And,
yeah.
for the first half of my 20s, I just felt very behind because like I said
Yeah.
before, like I was just YOLOing in Japan when all my
Yeah.
friends were progressing, right? So I just felt like I was not progressing in the speed that I should be as a late 20
And it,
something year old.
and now
So
it's you've got a job at a place that your parents like recognize. They're like, "Oh, I know Instagram." You know what I mean? Like, that's
exactly.
cool.
So
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So not any small companies anymore. Finally, at a brand name that people know,
Yeah.
and just so that just meant a lot to me. Which is
Mm,
why the heartbreak was also bigger when a year later I got laid off from the company.
yeah.
But yeah, I think everything happens for a reason. I'm definitely very grateful for Instagram. It was so much fun working for
Mm,
Instagram. I just felt like the people there were so talented. And the office itself is very Instagrammable, which is great, but also it gives me a lot of inspiration. Like you go in and there are like colors everywhere. There's like posters, artwork everywhere, which I think really helps with like encouraging like creativity, right? And new
mhm,
ideas. And how people can work together because there's a lot of open spaces, like open like community spaces within the office. So you can collaborate anywhere in the office if you want. So that itself, I loved.
mm,
And also, I learned so much about content design in Instagram because I think at the time I joined, there were 700, 800 content designers under Meta, so not just Instagram. So within Meta, and I was like, wow, like that. I think that is actually one of the biggest content design communities within a
mm,
company, the world, right?
yeah.
So at time, like when I first started, I was like, okay, so how do I stand out if I'm one of 800, right? Like, what am I writing if there's
Yeah.
799 other people writing it? But then I learned there's actually so many different paths that you can go within content. Like for example, you can be the champion for accessibility. You can be the champion for localization, terminology, voice and tone, content governance, like central foundations, things like that. So you can really find what you're interested in and really hone into it. So I ended up going for the route of localization because I'm like, okay, I can speak
Mm.
Chinese and Japanese. So why don't I learn more about how we translate copy and how can we localize for a better experience for our users? So I learned so much there that I am grateful for to this day.
You mentioned that the people there are really smart, and having spoken to people who work at, like the fangs, I guess, Netflix, Google, all those sorts of companies.
Mhm.
One of the benefits that people have told me is that basically, like, everyone you work with is like really smart and
Yeah,
really good. Now, you still have difficult personalities, and you
right.
still have people sometimes who do more than others, but
Mhm.
you're not working with like drop kicks. You're not working with people who don't know what they're doing.
Oh yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and
Yeah.
to me, that is a big attractive. It's a big attraction to a job like that because I've worked in companies where you know those people are less talented. They don't crack down on people being, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like lazy, right?
Mhm.
It's just there's just like, I don't know, just the expectations are lower.
Yeah.
Whereas now there's a downside to the expectations being higher at a company like Meta.
Mhm.
Can leads to people overworking and taking their work too seriously, which I'm
Right.
sure you've experienced. But it just seems to me like the one of the bigger upsides would be the fact that everyone you speak to is like a potential founder of like another company. They're
Actually,
just so switched
yes.
on. Was
Yeah.
that your experience?
That's exactly how I felt. And, the amount of new ideas that you see and how proactive people are is something that
Mm,
I personally really, really enjoyed. I think they do
mm,
hackathons multiple times a year, and I took part in one of them too, because like,
mhm.
whoever, right? Whoever has an idea for any product within Meta, you're more than welcome to join the hackathon.
Yeah.
So at the time, I had the idea of allowing stories to be editable because for some reason you
Mm,
can't edit a story right now on Instagram,
okay.
and it's really annoying because if you have a typo, you have to delete the story and then upload it again.
And re-upload
So
it. Yeah.
when that happens, maybe most of the people won't even bother uploading another one, right? So then you just suffer in the loss of stories.
Mm,
So I did a lot for this project. I would head up engineers because I can't do it myself. I need the engineer to do it with me. I hit up researchers to find existing data on how much people actually delete the stories and then upload them again, and whether or not typo is a reason for that. And then I also got like data scientists back up to see how big this impact would be for the project. So I went through the entire process. It was only a 3-day hackathon, but I feel like I learned so much in those 3 days, basically working as a project manager for it, because content-wise, there's not that much that you need to do, right? It's just the edit button. But then really like gathering people and pitching it to stakeholders, right? And we actually won the People's Choice Award for this feature. So I was very proud of it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. But then it was very difficult to actually put it on a product roadmap to make it happen. But
yeah,
so to
that's a whole.
I still hope. Yeah, I still hope that one day we can edit the stories.
That's something I think people don't realize in any type of company, but especially software. Like people go like, "Oh, why don't you just do this?" You know, it's like it's a great idea. Like a lot of people will use a product and they'll say, "Oh, it'd be great if you do this." And I guarantee, if you have an idea, someone within the company has also thought of that idea. Like they're not sitting around going like, "Oh, we don't want to do anything."
Yeah.
But actually implementing it and getting it done takes convincing people. Why should we prioritize this over this? Which is a totally different skill set. And at a company like Meta, where you have very specific goals and roadmaps and plans, if you're going to alter that plan, it's essentially like turning a huge rudder on a ship. So you better have like a really good reason for wanting to do it. And being able to convince someone, you can't just go like, "Oh, this is a good idea." You know, what's the bottom line? What are the figures? What's the ROI here?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've experienced the challenges in getting that done.
Yeah, and that's why the numbers come in really handy. That's why I had to work so close with UXR and also data science to just make sure I have the numbers to back me up. I think the one data that I remember is that out of all the complaints that Instagram gets, 20% of it is about the stories not being editable. So it's actually a lot.
Wow, really?
20%. Yeah, it's a lot of people that have had the request that can you just make stories editable? But then I think to the company that this is just a UX improvement. It doesn't make the company any money, which is why. So how do we align user goals with business goals? And I think finding that balance is what have been so hard in putting that feature into the product roadmap.
So much of that's a really great example because I've spoken to other UX writers or content designers who are like seeking advice, and it's something that I experienced earlier in my career where I would have an idea and manager would say, "Cool, that sounds good. What's the impact going to be?" And I would kind of be like, well, I don't know. So a lot of the time there aren't readily available metrics that you can just go and grab and find out you kind of have to go through this discovery. So your example there, like, okay, 20% of your complaints are about stories not being editable.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people don't realize you then have to as you just said, translate that into cash. So you then have to go to analytics and say, okay, of these people who complain, is their behavior different from other customers' behavior? Do they eventually like stop using altogether? Right. So then you have to say, okay, well, the lifetime value of a customer is worth X. If these people drop off, then it's a potential loss of X. So if we reduce that, blah, 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 blah. So you end up having to do sort of this, and it can feel a little bit like you're kind of like drawing a long bow and sort of stretching a little bit. And, because it's a financial model. But that's what it takes to convince a company that, your little idea, which, works well in theory, is actually going to save the company money or make the company money in practice.
Yeah, exactly. So, but stories creation actually really helps with the company because the more stories there are, the more ads you can put.
Right. Yes. No. Exactly. Yeah.
It does make the company money.
Yeah. So did that end up getting? So it's still not. They're still not editable. You still can't edit.
They're still not editable. And I
go on, Zach.
During the project, I learned why it's so hard to do because when you upload a story, let's say you have the picture, you have the text, you have a sticker. all of them, like all of those things are actually laminated into one layer when you upload a story, which is
Okay.
why it's very difficult to take those elements apart and then edit them. But then even then, I work with the engineers and we actually figure out a solution, which is to when you upload a story, we'll save that as a draft, but without you knowing. So that if you do want to edit the story,
Cool.
we'll just take you back to the draft mode, which Instagram has.
Ah.
you
Yeah,
already
yeah.
have a draft mode for stories. So why don't we just use the same logic for editing? So that's like the solution that we came up with. And we
Cool.
figured out how to do it actually.
Yeah.
So even I think a PM that I was working with had a he loved the idea and he was going to put it on the roadmap, but I think we both got laid off in 20.
Yeah. Well,
It didn't happen.
yeah. Well, we'll
Yeah.
touch on that in just a second. I
Yeah.
just want to ask you one more question about like working at Meta though, because what was the biggest change in your thinking, or perhaps the biggest maybe the biggest surprise about working in a company like that? Because I think for a lot of people in content design, they go into working on software and they have, as you just mentioned, all of these great ideas, and then they run into like these technical blocks and they realize, oh, we can't do that because the software architecture is like this, or we can't do that because of this particular legacy technology that we're using, or the type of server you're using, or whatever. Was there a moment like that for you where you were kind of like, oh, I kind of see now like why this is so complex and why this is so difficult to get stuff done? May
Yeah,
not be software architecture, but something.
Yeah, I think for me, it's more so the processes and reviews, because at Instagram, things actually move quite slowly. Like, it would take months to get a product launched because there is a pretty strict timeline and process. Like, for example, after I come up with content, I have to share the content with other content designers in my team just to get, second eyes, right, on the copy I write. And then we have to take it to design review. And then you probably do a few rounds of that because leadership would give you feedback. And then after that, you would go to legal and compliance review. And actually within that process, if your content also overlaps with another team, then you would have to do like a review with all those other teams as well. And then if it's like concerning like a design system change, that you would have to talk to central foundation. So you could be talking to a lot of people before getting something approved. And then even after getting it approved, then you would go to testing, right? And if it comes back from testing and it didn't perform well, then we will have to iterate again. So it's actually a lot of loops before we can officially launch a product. So I learned so much from that. And there's also like a lot of documents that we use as well, especially for content. I think that was a really good chance for me to just see like what kind of guidelines or like foundational stuff there is for content. So that after when I went to different companies and I realized, oh, you guys don't have like, let's say a glossary, or you guys don't have like a UX writing style guide, then I would know, okay, this is something that we have to establish before scaling the team to a bigger size. Yeah. So Instagram gave me a lot of insights to that.
It's like a crash course in business, really. Which is great.
Definitely.
But as you mentioned, unfortunately you experienced a layoff. And, in 2022, we saw all of these layoffs start, and there have been so many people laid off. And I feel like it was a pretty dark time, obviously, for you being laid off. It was also from my perspective, sitting outside of it, I was like looking at all of these posts just saying like, these people have been laid off. This entire team has been laid off. See you later. It was just like pretty relentless. Right. I hate the question, like, what was it like? Because obviously it was terrible. But did you get a sense you were going to be laid off before it happened? Was it a surprise? How did that happen?
No one knew. No one knew, so I didn't know. But of course, I wanted to, just prepare myself, right? If that was really the case. I still remember the day before the layoff, like me and my team, a bunch of people actually went out to drink because we're like, we
Probably
don't know.
A good idea.
Time we'll be hanging out together. So I'm really glad we did, because I love working with the people that I was working with. And then, but they did tell us, hey, if you're getting laid off, then you would get an email at like 7 a.m. If not, you would get an email at 8 a.m. So then I got the email at 7 a.m. And I just couldn't believe it because, like I mentioned, I was on a work visa. So getting laid off would mean I would have 60 days to find a new job. And if I don't find a new job, I'll have to pack my bags and leave the country. So to me, like losing a job is much more than just losing a job and losing a financial, support. So it's like my whole livelihood in America.
Yep.
So then when I saw that email, I just couldn't believe it. And everything it just felt so heavy, right? Looking at the words that I never wanted to read. And then I just remember not being able to say anything. I was just laying in bed because it was 7 a.m. I was laying in bed looking at the emails, and I just started crying because I didn't know what to do. And my husband, but then boyfriend, was next to me, and he didn't know what to say either because we just didn't know what to do. Like, what are the next steps, and how to move forward, like from that point. So that day, he actually took a day off to just be with me, and we just went out. We were still living in Manhattan at the time in New York. So then we just, went to the places that I like my favorite Japanese bookstore, and we got ramen. They're just like small little things. We sat at the park to just, take a step back and appreciate life a little bit outside of work. So, and every time when I'm sad about something, I just tell myself, hey, Cara, you can cry for a day, but starting from tomorrow onwards, you have to pick yourself back up and look forward, to the future. So that's something I tell myself all the time. So I just let myself cry that one day happened. And then after that, you gotta think about what to do next. Like, is it finding a job? Is it focusing on something else? Is it starting your own venture? So yeah, that was a long period. Like, I think I wrote a blog about the half a year that I didn't have a job and how I just focused all my time on paddling. And I'm very glad that I have that hobby to rely on, because like paddling really, I think it saved me, to be honest, for those 6 months. Yeah, it gave me a purpose, despite getting rejected all the time from jobs. So, yeah.
So you took a while to get another job. So how were you able to maintain your visa?
I got married.
Oh, you got married. There you go. That's always a good.
Yeah, it was so stressful. Like,
are you saying to everyone being laid off, like, just get married and then you'll just be able to stay?
That would be my biggest advice.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I only have 60 days to find a job, and I think at like 50th day, I'm like, this is not happening. I'm still not getting any offers, and I would go. Oh my god, like that 6 months. Like, I would go so far in the interview process. I would go to final interview for so many companies, and I would just not end up in any offers. Like, it was wild. So then I just couldn't land anything. So I talked to my boyfriend. I'm like, can we get married? Because
can we get married?
I didn't want to ask the question. As a girl, you never want to ask that question. But then I'm like, I really needed it, because by that point I was just crying every day. I was screaming at the walls of my apartment. It was just no good. Like, I needed that to end. So he thought about it for. But 5
you were going to get married. You were going to get married anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I knew to propose like soon anyway. So we just accelerated everything.
That's so funny. But hey, I mean, it worked. So I want to go back to what you said about, you took that day where you just really processed the news. I think there's really something to be said for having almost like a distinct like mourning period. I think for people who get laid off, I've seen it firsthand where some people get really energized by it. And they're like, right, I need a new job now. I'm going to go out. I'm going to do my resume. I'm going to do my portfolio. And there are others who just like, you know what? I need to process this, and then I'll be okay. And I think if you don't give yourself permission to process it, then you can end up crashing and burning, because it just ends up overwhelming you.
Yeah, exactly. And looking for a job is a full-time job. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of mental effort, and then you would get rejected. So I understand that rush, oh, hey, I can do this, maybe this is a fresh start. But then in that process, you would probably get bogged down, and, you would feel like, this is not going as smooth as I want it to be. So it's important to reset the mind, I think. And just.
Did you take it personally?
Oh, I did a little bit, because I knew that the content design team was hit pretty hard. So then in my head, I'm like, oh, does that mean the company doesn't value what we do or doesn't understand what we do? Is that why they lay us off? But then I also, because I kind of knew like who got laid off as well from just LinkedIn posts and stuff. So then I saw a pattern, and it's like a certain level. And if you have been in the company for less than 3 years, like you're
Yeah.
mostly hit. So, so I knew there's
First in, first
formula.
out, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
Yeah.
There's probably a formula, and it's probably not performance based because I did get a really good rating right before
Right.
the layoff. So I knew it's not performance based. So yeah,
But it's
so
hard to tell yourself that, right? Like when it's
right,
happening.
exactly. I'm
Yeah.
like, Cara, you did great, but the
Yeah.
company had to do what it had to do.
Yeah.
um, yeah, but it still took a long time to heal from that. I think
Yeah.
even a year after the layoff, like I would still like, I would go back to the neighborhood where the office was, and then I would still feel a little sting in my heart because I'm like, wow, I see all these people with the Meta badge, badging in. I'm like, wow, I used to be one of those people. And
Yeah.
I actually, like an ex coworker invited me back to the office one day and just grab lunch together. And I don't know, but everything just felt kind of far,
Mm,
and not familiar anymore. But
mm.
that was like a year after the layoff, so it has been some time, but it just didn't feel like I still belong there. So yeah, I'm fine now.
Yeah.
Like I don't feel like sad or anything now because so much has happened since the
Yeah.
layoff. And like I truly believe that everything happens for a reason because actually my manager right now is also she wasn't my manager at Instagram, but we worked in the same team.
Oh,
And we
okay. So you worked together before. That's great.
right, exactly, and we were both laid off at the same time, so we kept in
Yeah.
touch,
Wow.
and all of that, and yeah, we crossed our paths again at the same company. So,
That's awesome.
and that's
So,
the
so
same.
tell me about the job searching process because that
Mm,
I mean, I talked to you a little bit during that time,
yeah, yeah,
and there were, you know, I felt a little guilty because I sit outside of that
mm,
I run my own business, so like I can't get fired. So like I look at people, and then in that type
yeah,
of experience, and I'm kind of like, I feel really guilty. I really want to help, and so
yeah,
you and I got a little bit of news about what it was like and so on, but the sense was just that it was just like so competitive.
it was so
So many applicants. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that was
yeah,
like?
for sure. But I want to thank you first for helping me make introductions
Oh,
during the time, connecting me to other content design professionals. Like that helped a ton, like, in getting interviews.
I'm
So
glad.
yeah, I think one lucky thing that happened to me was that getting laid off from Meta, there was a huge ex-Meta group on Facebook. So,
Mm,
and
yep.
especially for content design. So there are two Facebook groups, one for just general Meta people and then one for content design. And people would just post jobs like left and right. And a lot
Hmm.
of the hiring managers would be ex-Meta people. So I got a lot of
Right.
interviews. Yeah, I got a lot of interviews from that group and just being able to make connections just by saying, hey, I also worked at Meta.
Mhm,
That
mhm.
really made it easy to get interviews. But whether or not you get the job is a different story, just because,
Yeah.
like you said, there's like 1,000 people applying for one job. So, which is why I would go to 5, 6 final rounds and still not land anything. And
Mm,
so at the end, half a year after I got laid off, I started at NBC Universal as a contractor because I just could not land any full time jobs.
mm,
But then my manager at NBCU, she is also ex Meta, and she was looking for someone who has UX writing background with localization focus, which is exactly
yeah.
what I did, right?
It's
In Instagram.
exactly what you do. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly what I did. So to me, it just felt like, wow, everything happened for a reason. Like I learned about localization on Instagram so that now I can help NBCU build out their platforms. So, and then from there, I think for PayPal, the recruiter reached out to me. And I think by then, like the job market has gotten a little bit better already. So
Yeah.
then I interviewed for them, just as a why not type of thing. And then, yeah, eventually got a full time offer at Venmo, but then it didn't work out at the end because they had a return to office policy and there's
Mm,
no office in LA. So when I
yeah.
made the move from New York to LA, I had to leave the job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But that's okay. You've landed a great new job and you're doing well. It's
yeah,
interesting though because I see people talking about. You mentioned the job market has recovered. Sometimes still see people talking about, oh, the content design job market is really bad, and I'm like, is it? Like because I look around a lot now and I see a
yeah,
lot of jobs that are available.
yeah.
Maybe not as crazy as it was during COVID,
Oh yeah,
but
yeah,
hiring in every industry was crazy during COVID, and to me,
yeah,
it seems like there's actually, to me, it's more sort of just normal now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that, but because again,
Yeah.
you've just had this job experience lately, but the sense I get is that things are okay. Things are
I
okay
think
right
so
now.
too. I think so too. And layoffs, I think nowadays are seen as more of a common happening. Like it will
Yeah.
probably, a few people will probably be laid off like here and there, but it's not like big scale layoff. So it
Yeah.
still happens. But then I see a lot of content design openings too, especially for contractor roles. So if
Yeah.
if I have to give any advice to people who just lost their jobs, it would be to consider taking up like freelance or part time or contract jobs because there is a ton out there, and you never know because these companies after a few months they may extend you a full-time offer.
Yes.
So
Yep.
yeah, exactly.
It's
So
often how
just
it
be
happens.
open. Yeah. So just be open to all the options,
But
and
you
just be willing to interview. Yeah.
you mentioned you got to the last round a bunch of times and then
Mhm.
you unfortunately unsuccessful. Did
Mhm.
they give you any feedback during that time about what was stopping you from getting the offer?
I think
Um,
they didn't always give me feedback, but I think one that did was that they just found someone with better experience. um,
yeah, right.
so, like
Okay.
more like experience that aligns more to
What
the
can you
role.
do about that? Like, and
Yeah.
that's I'm interested to know, like, after going through that whole period,
Mhm.
what did you learn about having to apply for a bunch of jobs, especially like content design
Mhm.
jobs, and
Yeah.
what helped you stand out? Obviously, like lack of experience, not much you can do about that. But was there
Right.
anything that you did that you think actually really helped in your favor?
Yeah. I think what worked for me in getting the PayPal offer is saying that I have had fintech experience because
Hmm.
I remember seeing my manager, like the hiring manager's eyes just lit up when I said Silicon Valley. Yeah,
Yeah,
so when I said I've worked at, a crypto firm and then Silicon Valley Bank and then all of that, I think I saw the light bulb thing go off, and then I knew then that they probably thought I was a good fit. So
yeah.
I think it's just bringing up relevant experiences to your hiring manager would help you a lot. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, great. And also, like, it it's difficult because you went through that initial, I'm going to call it a rejection. I
Mhm.
don't really like that word, but
Yeah.
that's certainly how you felt, I would imagine, of being laid
Mhm.
off. And then
Yeah.
you just have to go through that process again and again
Yeah.
and again and again. And it just must be just so relentless.
Yeah.
And, but sometimes people, people ask us a lot actually, like, oh, I'm, redoing my portfolio or my resume and so on. What were some of the things you did during that time to sort
Mhm.
of maybe put yourself out there, make yourself look, you know, more attractive as a candidate?
I think I whenever I apply to jobs, I try to contact the recruiter or the hiring
Hmm.
manager on LinkedIn too. Like if I can figure out who it is, I would
Hmm.
usually message them. And obviously not everyone is going to respond to me. But then actually a lot of people have, and a lot of people have offered me an interview by that. So at least I got one foot in, which is really nice. But I know they, if everyone messages the recruiter, they're gonna get like 500 messages in LinkedIn. So it doesn't always work, but then it has worked for me in the past. Referrals like sometimes work, but then I feel like so many people also get referrals to the jobs they want nowadays that it hasn't really helped me stand out so much.
Hmm.
I did put together a shorter portfolio that I would use for presentations because I feel like all these companies, like the interview process is very similar, where you have a one-on-one with a hiring manager, and then maybe a take-home challenge, and then you would present your work, and then like a presentation about your past work to a panel, and then you would do one-on-ones with cross-functional partners. That has been the process for a lot of companies that I interview for. So I just have this one standard presentation that I do for companies. So I'm not like reinventing the wheel for every company because that's a lot of work. So
Hmm.
just have one ready, and then depending on what the company maybe specifically asked for, then I would take out slides and maybe add some slides in, add more like screenshots or examples from past work. So just having that resource ready is very helpful because you never know what a company is going to ask for, and then you don't want to just have 2 days to work on something that is so big that can determine whether or not you get the job. Yeah.
Yeah. Couple of good pieces of advice you just mentioned. Like, I think the ultimately, I don't like that this is the case, but it's the same in any industry. It really comes down to who you know. Like,
Mm.
you can be the best, but sometimes you just need a helping hand to be able to say to someone who's the hiring manager. And a lot of the time, people would ask me during that time, "Oh, who's the hiring manager for this? Do you know who the hiring manager is?" And then sometimes I would message them and be like, "Hey, are you hiring for this role?" And they would say, "No, but this person is." And then I
Oh,
would get that email. So I think that's a really great piece of advice you just mentioned. The portfolio one, it was shocking to me how many times I would look at a portfolio or a resume to review, and it would be like just copied and pasted from what they've done before, and they haven't really tailored it to the job that they're going for. Now, obviously, you don't want like 5 different versions of your portfolio, but as you
yeah,
just mentioned, being able to like put some slides in, customize it a little bit,
yeah.
don't spend too long on it, but enough to make yourself stand out. Just
Mhm.
simple things like that can go a long way in
Yeah,
helping you
exactly.
stand out.
Yeah, and you don't need that many screens, right, in the portfolio. I think like if you
Mm,
have maybe 3 or 4 projects and each project has a different theme, then I think that's
mm,
good. For example, you can have product naming, you can have like content testing, you can have localization. So they're all on different things. So
mm,
then, and I think these are all pretty common skill sets that hiring managers ask for content designers. So just
mm.
having those ready to go in the pocket, in your back pocket, I think that would do. Yeah. And just having
I think,
screenshots, maybe like before, after, and then the star method, right?
yeah,
Like the
yeah.
approach. And yeah.
One thing that I've seen that really annoys me, I don't know why, but in a bunch of the portfolios that I've seen, the titles of the case studies will be like very bland, and it'll
Mm.
just be like PayPal or Netflix or whatever. And
Right.
then sometimes it's a little more detailed, like information architecture at Netflix. And it's
Mhm.
like I was giving a portfolio review recently, and I was like, if I'm a hiring manager and I see that, like, first of all, I'm just one that says like Netflix is like, okay, information architecture at Netflix is fine. But what you really want is like solving the problem in the case study title. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Reducing, I don't know, churn through information architecture,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, it's just interesting to me. Like, I think during a whole job searching experience, you really have to be sitting there and going and put yourself in the mind of that hiring manager, because
Yeah.
they're only going to look at your portfolio or whatever for 30 seconds,
Yeah.
maybe a
Yeah.
minute. And so you really have to try and make yourself as attractive as possible.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly. How to
yeah,
present. Yeah. How to present
yeah,
your information. Like that itself is a work of art because you
yeah.
want to tell people what you're capable of doing in your portfolio, the style or the format that you're presenting information in. So
Did you ever practice? Like practice doing your presentations and interviews and stuff like that?
No, I think the amount of interviews I've done, I think those are all my
That's practice in
practices.
itself, right? Yeah.
Those are
Yeah.
real-time practices that I have. But some companies did give me feedback from those presentations. So
Okay.
mostly just it's not really like big, major feedback, but just that I talk too fast. so
Oh,
so
okay. Right.
I talked too fast, and there was too many slides in the
Okay.
presentation. So then after
Yeah.
that, I cut down on a lot of stuff. Yeah.
That's fine. It's I I like that feedback. I like it when they give you feedback. But the thing about doing those types of presentations is, having done them myself, so for anyone who doesn't know, when you go and apply to a job at like a large tech firm or whatever, there are several rounds. Usually the first is like a call where you'll get on with someone, and they basically just vet you to make sure you sort of know what you're talking about. You're not like completely out of pocket. And the next, you will probably have either some sort of longer interview, and which might lead to like a take-home test, and then once you do that, which is sort of like a project, you go in, and a lot of these companies have what they call like an on-site, and that on-site, you might be presenting to 5 people at once. You might be presenting to in in my meta experience, it was 4 presentations. I think I did like a presentation to 4 people, and then subsequent interviews with like 3 or 4 people after that,
Yeah.
like one after another. So
Yeah.
you are exhausted at the end of these, and they will ask you very minute questions like, why did you do this instead of this? Why did you do that instead of that? What led you to this decision? What were the priorities that were underpinning all of this? Just like really, they really like, it feels like you're in surgery or something. People are just like ripping you apart, and
Yeah.
having to do that, multiple times is just, I don't know. It's just, for some, it's like unbearable. So, and then, as you just mentioned, sometimes you get out of it and you don't get any feedback at
Right.
all. You don't get any feedback. They're just like, nah, sorry, not a fit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I can see why people would take it personally because you don't know why you failed, right? Is it
yeah,
a mismatch in skill set or is it cultural fit? Is it how I answer the questions? It could be a lot of things.
yeah,
So yeah, I think I got lucky because my recruiter really prepared me well. Like he basically told me closely what questions would be asked in those
yeah.
interviews, so I had time to
You have
prepare
time
for
to
that.
prepare.
I
Yeah,
also knew, I just kind of knew like what people were looking for in like interviews. Like for example, if you mentioned that you have to work with legal and compliance when you're coming up with your copy, like that will get you a bonus point because a lot of the
yeah,
companies require you to work with legal and compliance. And then like just being able to support your thought process, right? They would,
yeah.
yeah. In my interview with the hiring manager at Meta, she asked me a lot of questions. Like she played devil's advocate and asked me a lot of questions. Why this word? Why not that word? Why this process or why not that process? So you have to really understand your past work well and just remind yourself of what you did, right? Because some of your past work could be years ago. Just
Mm.
remind yourself like what you did, why did you do something like X and Y, and why not Z? So just getting yourself prepared for those questions.
The assumptions one is important because for in a lot of interviews, what and I've both done this and I've seen it happen is
Mhm.
you don't explain the underlying assumptions behind what you're doing,
Mhm.
or worse, you don't make any assumptions at all. So in a lot of these take home tests, you don't get any context for like why you're changing things. They might just give you screens and say audit these screens, and
Yeah.
then you have to. And so a lot of the time, in lower performing tests, what I've seen happen is people just make changes and
Mhm.
according to like a standard set of grammatical rules. Higher
Mm.
performing tests, like you'll see people go like, okay, well, in a real world situation, I would do blah blah blah, and then I
Mhm.
would do this. I don't have that information, so I'm going to assume the company is prioritizing this. According to
Mhm.
that logic, this is
Mhm.
the priority. This is how I would make these decisions.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, like that, just thinking through that thought, taking people through that thought process separates you out from being like a poor candidate to like a really
Yeah.
well performing candidate.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like asking questions, right? Asking research questions. Can we do this in the research? And this is how I would do
Yeah.
it. We ask legal this question, why can't we do this? Like if you push back and if you let people know like what kind of questions you would ask, like different cross-functional partners, that would usually get you a bonus point too. Yeah, it shows
Yeah.
that you're thinking and not just
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
People are afraid of pushing back in those tests or in those interviews. Yeah, but actually, you want, as a hiring manager, you want
Yeah.
to see that. You want to
Right.
see people going like, well, hang on, what are the assumptions here?
Exactly.
Why are we doing it like this? Yeah,
Yeah.
that sort of
Yeah.
thing is gold.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's
So
how they would want you to show up in the job every day too.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. They just want to see the same person that they would see. So,
Yeah.
what have you learned during that whole process? Now that you're in your new city, or rather returning to your city that you love, you're in this great job. You've had all this experience now. Having gone through that layoff process and that really
Mhm.
troubled year,
Mhm.
how has that changed you as a content designer? And do you
Mm.
approach like your work with more confidence now? Like, how do you how do you feel?
I think definitely so. I think, eh, I mean, Instagram has still really taught me a lot about processes that I'm still bringing into my current job. Because right now for Empower, I think we only have 5, 6 content designers, so much
Mhm.
smaller than what we had at Instagram. And a lot of the things are not there yet. Like for example, I'm building the UX writing style guide with another person, and then there's no glossary. So there's a lot of things that I've identified as gaps that we need to develop in the future as we scale the team. So just bringing that knowledge to the team and also and letting people know, right, this is how our design team functions. Hey, we should have these reviews and we should have that review, but not to be overwhelming for the entire process, that it would delay timelines. So, and I realized that I see that all the time in different companies, like at PayPal as well. There is not much, like there's not a very strict structure for reviews. But because at a review, you don't want just one person to be the decision maker, right? Because then it could become a bottleneck. Like, what if that person's out of office and then there's no one approving work? So how do we avoid that? But then how do we maintain excellence, right? And a high standard for designs, even when there is no one decision maker. So that's something I learned. And just be confident, right? Just have like research and data to back you up as you're making content decisions. Yeah, that's something that I have really learned. And also how to present to leadership too. You don't want to bombard them with information because all they really care is one slide. One slide, maybe 5 words. So how can you condense everything, like the work you've done for the past 3 months on one slide? Because they don't have time, right? They may only have 5 minutes for you. So how do you condense everything and make it easy to absorb and succinct for them? Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And to anyone out there who's sort of going through the same thing that you went through in terms of a layoff, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, keep talking to people. I mean, keep applying for jobs, keep talking to people, and just be open to different opportunities. Like I said before, like maybe it's not a full-time gig. Maybe you can start a contract gig and see how that goes, because that can take you to great places. You may fall in love with working contract. Like there was a point in my layoff journey where I'm like, maybe I should just work contract because it's so much more flexible and you get to work with different clients for a short period of time. So you get to learn a lot more and make a lot more impact to different companies. So there are definitely different, routes that you can go, and just don't limit yourself to working full-time. Hey, I really want this one company or full-time only, because that's likely going to limit your chances of getting a job. So just be open and be positive, right? Really find yourself outside of work. I think that was really helpful for me, just finding purpose outside of my career. Like I'm so grateful that I had paddling as a hobby, because I feel like, my job was taken away, my work visa was being taken away, but paddling was one thing that can never be taken away from me, right? The progress that I make in this hobby, the hard work that I put in, no one can take that away from me. And I think that was very important to my mental health at the time, because I feel like everything was being taken away from me, so that when I have something that I can rely on, that I can, be open to, and just love, right? And share the love with the community that I have, with the friends that I have, that was super important to my mental health at the time. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. Cara, I always love talking to you. You're always so happy. You're such a pleasant person to speak with. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, Cara Lam. I think you will see my picture, and you can follow me on Instagram at the Cara Adventures. Is I think what my handle is.
Cara Adventures. So will people see you hiking and paddling and doing all sorts of
exactly all the
things?
Okay. Yeah,
excellent. I will watch those. I envy you, because I hate going outside. But in any case, Cara, always great talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
You too, Patrick. Thank you so much for the podcast.